Everybody. Today I'm going to talk about looking for an adaptive response. How to use a sensory gem effectively to meet the needs of a sensory seeker or craver. So let's talk about sensory integration versus a Shakespearean play. The comparison between SI and a play might be an interesting metaphor at first, but I chose it because it's important to note that they're both fundamentally different concepts. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about sensory integration versus a Shakespearean play. Because in sensory integration, we set the stage and our kids play it out. But let's talk about that and just explore the differences between being a Shakespearean playwright and being an occupational therapist. So let's talk about script versus individualized. In a Shakespearean play, it's all scripted. There are characters, there's a dialogue, we have an expectation of rules that will be followed. Not that there aren't rules in a sensory gem per se, they're there to keep people safe, but we don't have a script. We don't have a dialogue that needs to be followed. With sensory integration treatment, it's often much more individualized. So though we may set the stage similar for two different children, the way it plays out could be very, very different. We're supposed to tailor our interventions on the unique sensory processing needs of each person. So there might be some general principles and activities and some safety guidelines in the gym. How our act actually gets played out is going to be very different. So let's talk about structured versus dynamic. In a Shakespearean play, the characters have a plot. They follow a predetermined script written by William Shakespeare or Randall Fedoruk. But with sensory integration, it's often more individualized. We tailor the interventions based on the unique sensory processing needs of the child that is in front of us. Therefore, the activities can change. It's dynamic, it's fluid. What you thought you were going to do may not be what you end up doing. I don't know if many of you saw the show with Adam Sandler and Jennifer Aniston called Just Go With It. And there was a little girl that just said, "Oh, I'm going to use my English accent, but just go with it." All right, well, that is what I'm talking about here. Sometimes with sensory integration, we're just going to go with it if it's leading us towards a path of an adaptive response. So we have to think about what is the purpose. In a Shakespearean play, we're there to entertain. The outcome is predetermined by the script. In SI treatment, we're there to help individuals with better sensory processing. We want them to improve their ability to respond and interact with their environment. So the outcome is going to be very individualized. We're looking for that adaptive response. And what is an adaptive response? Again, it's going to be individualized. For one child, an adaptive response might be to say hi to another kid in the gym, or to tolerate being in the gym when it's loud and noisy, or to be able to put on a pair of jeans, or brush their hair, or wash their hands, or eat a new texture. That all of those could be adaptive responses, and they could be the result of the work that you do in the sensory gym. At the core of it, using a sensory gym to lead to an adaptive response involves a lot of collaboration. We collaborate with other therapists, with individuals that are receiving the treatment, and a lot of times the caregivers. After all, we are working on client-centered goals. things that the parents want for their family and for their child. So, yeah, I use the metaphor of a Shakespearean play because I like to talk about sensory integration and the gym being a stage, and you, the therapist, and the child being players on that stage. And I do believe that to be effective, we do need to set that stage. The sensory gym is not a free for all. We don't just stand back and let them play. We do need to guide them. We are their spirit guide through the sensory gym. However, each person's journey is unique. So it's a personalized narrative, not a pre written, standardized script that must be followed. So, like I said, sensory integration is not a free for all in our gym. Here are some 7 principles of intervention from the STAR Center. The STAR Center is a highly regarded research center in Colorado. I was fortunate enough to have some training from Sarah Schoen from the STAR Center, who came during my doctoral program at Rocky Mountain. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I learned from her. And these are 7 principles of sensory integration intervention. Number 1, be aware of arousal level and choose activities to modify as needed. If when they walk in the gym they're over aroused, please guide them towards a piece of equipment that is going to lower their arousal. Typically, slow rhythmic movements are going to lower arousal level. Heavy work, push, pull, lifting, climbing, proprioception, that should normalize arousal. Principle 2, work on relationships and engagement while engaging in sensory systems. Remember, sensory integration, the most important piece of it is your relationship with your client. You need the buy-in. I think in OT in general, our interpersonal relationship is key. You need to make a connection with your client, and so always working on that relationship is key. Principle 3, consider the impact of what you're doing on social participation, either with yourself, with their siblings, or people in the gym and around them. Incorporate some functional activities. Principle 4, almost all children, if not most, have issues with self-esteem that have to be addressed throughout your treatment. Find something that they're good at least for a portion of the session, and reinforce them for that. Highlight their strengths and work on the areas that need to be addressed, but highlight their strengths. Principle 5, I think this is key. Change the response to sensory stimuli. That's what we're doing here, right? If they're having a maladaptive response to touch, we want to change that narrative for them. We want them to feel comfortable in their own skin, so to speak. So all of our activities are geared towards improving that response. And I know I said this is about sensory seekers, so let me back up and say change their response to the environment. A sensory seeker comes in, and it's like an alcoholic in a bar. They see a smorgasbord of alcohol who just wants to drink everything until they pass out. A sensory seeker comes into our gym, and they see a smorgasbord of ways to meet their sensory needs. That's not going to change their response, though. You need to be very clear and guide them to activities that will normalize their level of arousal. So though they can seek some activities that are high arousing, bring them back to earth, give them some proprioceptive input, encourage or guide them gently towards activities that will help normalize their response. Principle 6, create a better match between your caregiver, your environment, and the child. And by this we mean educating the caregiver, looking at different environments that support their sensory needs, and of course, having a child that is not a round peg in a square hole, so that we understand and celebrate the differences in our neurodivergent children, and that we help focus on their strengths while addressing areas of concern. Notice I'm not saying weakness, I'm saying areas of concern or areas that need to be addressed. Principle 7, help children regulate their arousal throughout the day. And I have a follow-up to this presentation on sensory diets and home programming, because I think that what we do in the gym needs to be extended throughout the week. Hence why I am strongly encouraging, if not mandating, the use of our app and having constant contact, even if it's just a canned text message and a star system of points to get the kids to engage in activities that will help them regulate their arousal throughout the day, throughout the week, when they're not at Sensation Station. So sensory seeking is a term that we often use in sensory integration, and it's a condition where the brain has difficulty processing and responding to sensory information from the environment, and sensory seekers are always looking for more sensory input to keep their arousal level high. They tend to be high arousal. It's just one of the subtypes within a broader spectrum of sensory processing disorder. A craver is a sensory seeker who has a heightened need for stimulation. You all know them, you see them. I think my daughter is a craver. I mean, she loves to be on the go. She's always running around, she rarely sits. She's a craver. Whether that is going to lead to issues later on and remains to be seen. Right now, we're doing activities to help her normalize her arousal so that she can sit and read a book, and she can sit with speech and get some language. So the behavior can manifest across multiple sensory modalities. A sensory craver could be mouthing things if they crave oral input. We tend to notice the vestibular proprioceptive seekers because they're the ones that are crashing in play, climbing the walls, so to speak, or quite literally climbing the walls, jumping off of heights, and just doing things that are downright dangerous. These are our sensory cravers. Yep, here we got it. They don't just paint the paper, they paint their bodies. They're always jumping. They're constantly on the go. Look at that poor mom trying to get work. I feel ya, mom. I feel ya. So they can seek touch input. They can seek movement. They may be really loud and constantly singing and humming and making noises because they're trying to keep their level of arousal up and they're using auditory input. They could also be a visual seeker, constantly looking for more visual input. So here are some principles for intervention of sensory craving. Principle number 1, create an organized movement experience. So where I said the gym is not a free-for-all, we want to organize it a little bit for them. Not so much that it's a script, a Shakespearean script. That's why I started with that metaphor. We're talking about guiding them to more goal-directed and purposeful movement experiences. This is why we often default to obstacle courses, because they have a goal to them. They tend to be more goal-directed and a little bit more structure to them with their sensory seeking. But they aren't the end-all be-all. You don't just have to do obstacle courses with sensory cravers. It doesn't need to be the default. You can certainly guide them towards other activities like crashing through a wall of foam on a swing, which is a really fun activity that can then transfer over to a different activity. But that could be your movement that's organized around a game that has a goal that meets some of their need for crashing and vestibular input. Principle 2, interrupt self-initiated vestibular input. In other words, when it's not something that is purposeful, goal-directed, or normalizing, interrupt it and replace it with something else. Redirect. This is principle 2 is all about redirecting. So if they're getting into a cycle of just running around, and we've seen our kids do this, right? They run from the lobby into the gym, run from the lobby into the gym. I mean, I, for one, have one that does that. It's the one that I hurt my back with. We have to interrupt that. As hard as it is, we have to interrupt that pattern and replace it with something more organized that are going to be more goal-directed and purposeful. Principle 3, use sensory and self-regulation programs that incorporate a lot of heavy work. So like I said, if you're going to do movement activity, and I hope you are, and we have plenty of vestibular activities in our gym, always follow it up with something deep proprioception or heavy work. Roll a therapy ball on them. Wrap a blanket in and give them some, wrap them in a blanket. Do the body sock. I rarely see the body socks come out of the closet. Use the body sock. Have them carry some heavy books or the heavy balls around the gym. Climbing up the wall is heavy work, so that can work. Pushing a ball through the tunnel. There's a lot of ways to get heavy work. Some yoga, that's why we have the yoga pictures on the wall. So some body weight exercises, some wheelbarrow walks, some even a scooter board is somewhat proprioceptive. It's got a vestibular component, so you got to be careful to make sure it's doing what you want it to do, but you get the picture of principle 3. Principle 4, use environmental modifications. Set up some artificial boundaries. Where they're going to engage in the movement. What are the limits? Are we going to stay in the gym? Are we going to stay in this area of the gym? Principle 5, and I really like this, and I think we all do a good job. Always have the child participate in both setup and cleanup. So if we want them to crash on the mats, they need to stack the mats. When we're done, we clean up the mats. Cleanup is a great opportunity to have closure to our really fun, engaging, sensory-rich activity. So it gives closure. But what it also does is gives an opportunity to ground ourselves. And a lot of times it involves heavy work. So cleanup, I love cleanup. Principle 6, enclosed or small spaces when we need to control activity. If you're finding that your child is kind of out of control in the bigger gym, we are very lucky in Franklin to have a smaller gym upstairs. Try the smaller gym. If you're in one of my other spaces where we don't have the luxury of 2 gyms, try go to another room. You can bring some sensory activities to another room. You can certainly bring a therapy ball into one of the small treatment rooms. Some of my small treatment rooms actually have a swing hookup in them. So you can set up a small swing in there and work in a smaller closed space. Principle 7, start and stop activities. Make sure that there is a start and a stop. It's important to have that stop so they understand the limits of their sensory craving and when it's time to stop. Principle 8, use backpacks, use fanny packs with fidgets, mouth toys. Use all your tools that they can then perhaps carry over out into the community. So what we're doing is we're looking for an adaptive response. We're going to provide lots of activity, but we want it to be purposeful, and we want to incorporate a stop and a start. So it's a run, a hop, and a jump, and then stop. Bring it back. Lots and lots of proprioception. Whatever you do, again, when we talk about sensory diets, the magic formula, basically, movement, touch, then proprioception. Touch, movement, then proprioception. Whenever possible, give the kids a job. Erase the board. Move those chairs. Can you take those books over for me? Bring the game back to the room. Let them carry it. Use proprioception hand fidgets, oral motor opportunities. After doing all of this, what we hope to see is a decreased level of arousal, less seeking, and guess what? Now we're ready to work on the zones of regulation. Now we're ready to sit down and have a snack. Now we're ready to play a game and work on social thinking and flexible responses. Sensory integration is dynamic and ongoing. You can't just sit back or stand back in the gym and let it play out. That's not sensory integration. That's a free-for-all. So what we're looking for is something a little more organized. As therapists, we need to be active players in the show. All right? We're not just we're a director, we're a producer, and we're a player. We evaluate, we collaborate, and we intervene. We're going to modify input as needed. If we see we gave them a little too much, then bring it back down. Here are some 5 favorite activities for a sensory seeker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. We're so happy to have you. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica, and we are the Certified Occupational Therapy Assistants at HARCLA. And today we are talking all about sensory seekers.
We're going to share what activities you can do to support your sensory seeker. I have a lot to say on the topic.
I know you do. The first thing you want to do is identify if you have a sensory seeker or not. Now, if you have a sensory seeker, you might already know, but just in case, we are going to give you a couple of signs or symptoms of sensory seekers so you can know if you have one or not.
Keep in mind, we do have 8 senses, and you can be a seeker in any of those 8 senses, and you can be an avoider in any of those 8 senses as well. You're not just an all-over seeker or an all-over avoider or craver. You can be mixed, so keep that in mind as well.
So some of the signs of sensory seeking is a child who is always on the go. They might mouth non-edible objects pretty frequently.
They can't seem to get enough input, so they're always craving more input, especially compared to their peers at school.
They might be considered the bad kid at school.
They're fidgeting constantly and they're always moving.
They might have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism.
And maybe they just make noises to make noises.
So if your child has any of those signs or symptoms, they might be a sensory seeker. We do have a really great sensory preference checklist from Sensational Brain. It's free, it's linked in the description, and that can kind of give you an idea of what type of input your child seeks out and if they are a sensory seeker or not.
First, we want to remind you how important it is to meet your sensory seeker's threshold. We do have a separate video, a separate podcast. We will link it in the description as well, so you can get some more information on what it means to meet the threshold of the child. But just a quick breakdown is the child is seeking a certain input for a reason. Their body is craving it. It's not processing and modulating that input, so they need more. So we want to give them that input first.
Now, our 5 favorite activities for sensory seekers. Are you ready?
Yes.
You think they're ready?
Yes.
Okay, number 1 is to use swings. Now, if you don't have a swing at your house, that's totally fine. Go to the playground. Some playgrounds don't have swings anymore though, so find one that does. But swings are a great way to give your sensory seeker some really great vestibular input. You can swing in a lot of different ways, forwards, backwards, sideways, on your stomach. You can spin, just whatever kind of swinging you want.
Yes. Oftentimes, these kiddos are seeking that vestibular input and they want more of it because their body isn't registering that input. So swinging is a great option. The second one is to jump and crash. So whether you have bean bags, you have a crash pad in your house, maybe you have couch cushions that you can take off your couch and put them on the floor, pillows, anything that your child can jump and crash into provides a lot of vestibular input as well as calming proprioceptive input.
Even jumping on a trampoline, whether it's a big trampoline or a mini trampoline in your house or one of the exercise BOSU balls to jump on is great. And then we actually also like to use the HARCLA Hug to jump and crash onto. It can be kind of a fun way to use that. Number 3 is to use resistive oral motor input. This is great for a sensory seeker who is mouthing non-edible objects throughout the day. Maybe they're chewing on their shirt collar, maybe they're chewing their pencils apart. So giving them some good resistive oral motor input throughout the day can be really, really helpful. We love gum.
I'm always chewing gum.
Always. You can even use different types of food. So like really hard leather, like fruit leather or jerky, any food that is resistive or crunchy or chewy to really give them a lot of heavy work to their jaw.
Chewy teethers are great as well. Vibrating teethers are helpful. We do love the company Arc Therapeutic. We will link that in the description as well. And another favorite activity is what we call Bubble Mountain. And so this is filling up a bowl with some water and some soap and using a straw to blow and create a bubble mountain or a volcano. And it provides a lot of that great oral motor input that sensory seekers crave.
Okay, number 4 is going to be lots of proprioceptive input, which is heavy work and deep pressure.
Weighted blankets, weighted vests, weighted lap pads are all great tools.
We do have several different videos on using our weighted products for ideas on how and when to use them appropriately so they don't get overused, but so that they're actually helpful to your child's sensory system.
Yep. Animal walks are great. So things like bear walks, elephant walks, crab walks are fantastic. Getting your child into different positions, different weight-bearing positions, anytime you're using that resistive input to those big muscles, joints, and tendons, you're offering that proprioceptive input.
One thing we love to do is to complete these proprioceptive heavy work activities after vestibular-based activities. So like Rachel mentioned before, meet your child's sensory threshold with whatever input they're seeking. And then once they're ready, you can complete some calming proprioceptive work to just help them feel more calm afterwards.
We always say, when in doubt, prop it out.
But first, heavy work.
Yep. The last activity we love is using sensory bins. Sensory bins are all the rage right now, which is awesome, but they're actually designed for sensory processing and modulation activities. So you can use wet mediums like shaving cream or water beads, and then you can also use dry mediums like corn or rice or beans.
We love using sensory bins as part of an obstacle course, so incorporating it as one of the steps to an obstacle course, or even just as an activity by itself can be really great. Maybe even try hiding different small items like coins or little small Lego pieces in that sensory bin for your child to find and maybe do an activity with them once they find them.
Yep. For an added challenge, put a blindfold on them and they have to find these items blindfolded within the sensory bin, and then have them use their feet in the sensory bin as well. Make sure you clean their feet first because, kid feet, you never know. But have them stick their feet in the sensory bin so that way they can get the input all over their body. And one other thing to keep in mind is that when a child is seeking that tactile input, we want to offer that light touch. So offering like a rice dribbling down their skin that they have to process, or feathers on their skin, because that light touch is a lot of input for them to process. And for a lot of kids, it's a noxious stimuli. So offering that light touch, not necessarily the deep touch or that deep input, like we do with like the deep pressure brushing protocol, but that light touch can be really helpful as well.
So those are our 5 favorite activities for sensory seekers. First, identify your child's sensory seeking preferences. What are they seeking out? And then go ahead and give it to them.
Give these activities a try. Let us know how they go. If you try them out, send us a picture on Instagram. That's where we're hanging out. You can find us at All Things Sensory Podcast, as well as at Harkla_family.
Now, a quick reminder that if your child is really, really struggling with sensory processing and it is impacting their ability to get through their day, make sure you talk to your pediatrician and ask for an occupational therapy evaluation to look and see if maybe they qualify for occupational therapy services. That in-person therapy is 100% hands down the best way to go. All of our resources are a great place to start, but nothing beats that in-person therapy to help your child.
Absolutely. Make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. A new video drops every Tuesday, so don't miss out there. As well as our podcast, we launch a new episode every Wednesday. So if you need more resources, we have almost 200 podcast episodes. So head back to the beginning, listen to all of those if you haven't already. Lots of great resources and interviews there as well.
All right, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another video.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that video. I found it and thought that they did a really nice job of providing an overview of their favorite activities. And you know what? We don't have to reinvent the wheel because I think that we do a lot of what they said. So if it inspired you, great. If it reinforced you, even better. Let's talk a little bit about vestibular input and talk about upgrades and downgrades. I think this is the most confusing piece of sensory integration for people to understand. When we're providing vestibular input and we're not getting that adaptive response, so they seek movement and we're giving them some movement and they seem to be seeking it still. An upgrade could be to give them more movement or a different movement. The downgrade, right? And here's where it's tricky. The downgrade, if they're doing well, we give them less. So as children need less vestibular input, we give them less. And that is how we know that they're bringing them to a more normalized level of arousal. So proprioceptive input, it's never wrong, but it's not always right. So again, it's not a script. We're not going to always do the same thing with every child. However, that formula of using PROPE, when in doubt, use PROPE, works. And I like to end sensory diets and activities with proprioceptive input because it gives us a more chance that we are going to ground our kids and normalize. I think you guys get the picture, how to work with our sensory-seeking, craving children, how to use the gym to facilitate normal arousal. Now go and have fun. Enjoy yourselves because fun is essential. We have fun. We play with a purpose at Sensation Station. And thank you so much for listening to my rambling on, and I hope you learned something.